Story 1. I had to explain to my coworker, a 33-year-old man, that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west. After I told him, he asked, "Every day?" Story 2. When I was a teenager, my mom was convinced I was taking drugs. I needed to urinate, and even though I was only in the bathroom for about 30 seconds, I came out and she said, "Aha, got you." She said she knew I was doing drugs in the bathroom because I was on my period and I did not have time to change my tampon while I was there. I told her I had not changed my tampon because it had only been in for about an hour. Then she asked how I had urinated without changing my tampon. That is how I learned my mom did not know that the urethra is separate from the vagina. I told her I just moved the string out of the way. She was adamant it was impossible to urinate with a tampon in because the urine would not come out. She was about 50 years old at the time and still did not believe they were different openings. I had to go on the computer and pull up a diagram, and she still refused to believe it, saying, "I think I would know if I had two different holes." Anyway, a few years later, when I did start using drugs, she had no idea. Story 3. A person who did not want to install solar panels because they were worried that if too many people installed them, they would use up all the sunlight. Story 4. A guy at my first base got a girl pregnant and did not understand how. We asked him if he knew how babies were made, and he truly believed that you could have sex as much as you wanted but would not get pregnant unless you were married. Story 5. I had to explain credit cards to my 73-year-old mother. She did not know that by paying only the minimum balance she was racking up interest charges. She also did not know that you can pay a credit card balance in full each month. That she did not know explains a lot about how I was raised. Story 6. A coworker, very religious and not particularly bright, told me she had to rehome her cat. The cat was an unaltered female allowed outside and became pregnant a second time. I asked why she did not have the cat spayed. She said she should not have to and that the cat should know better than to be out whoring around. She insisted she would not have an immoral cat in her home. I tried to explain how cats work, but then decided the cat was better off elsewhere. Edit. I told my partner about this and added one more detail. The cat's name was Angel. She was a white cat. Story 7. My friend and I did a survey for $10 each. When we were finished, the man made us wait because he only had a 20. We offered to take the 20 and split it ourselves, but he did not like that. Then I offered to accept the 20 and give him $10 change so he could pay my friend. He stood and stared at me with the gears in his head, turning for about 15 seconds. Then he said, "No, we are just going to wait for change." Story 8. I have had many conversations with adults who do not understand how government benefits work, or even how their own Medicaid works. I have talked to a few who did not even know they were on Medicaid. They never questioned why they did not pay for doctor visits, medications, or health insurance. I have seen someone ask for $10,000 in rental assistance, thinking their local human services office could simply give $10,000 to everyone who asks. They also deny that they are in the same position as the people they loudly call freeloaders taking advantage of the system. So it is all right for you to receive food stamps, daycare assistance, Medicaid, Section 8 housing assistance, and gas vouchers, but God forbid someone you dislike gets half of that. Story 9. I was in the Air Force for 10 years. Most important documents there are portable document format files. I lost track of how many times I had to show someone how to press Control F. It was like watching cavemen discover fire. Story 10. My dad could not comprehend how people could be poor, lack health insurance or emergency savings, or have no retirement account. I tried explaining the boots theory. His response was to buy the good boots from the start. Story 11. My former partner was convinced that tampons were inserted, and then you yank the cord like a fucking rip cord and it inflates in there like a goddamn lifeboat. He truly believed it with all his idiotic heart. Story 12. I had an in-law tell me how morally reprehensible people in developing countries were for working in mining, tree cutting, or other environmentally damaging activities. She was not talking about the companies or the leaders, but the ordinary workers. When I said people will do almost anything to feed their families, she responded that they should let their families starve to death instead of cutting down trees in the rainforest, and she said she would do that. I was flabbergasted. Story 13. Back in the old days when checks or checks for my continental friends were commonly used, I had a signed check in my desk drawer for a delivery I was expecting. I foolishly left it blank, relying on my employee to fill it out when the delivery arrived. Her boyfriend found it and, thinking only of free money, filled it out in his own name, cashed it, and was surprised to learn that canceled checks were returned to the owner. He was arrested. Story 14. The number of people who do not understand how a graduated tax system works hurts my brain. No, your entire salary does not get taxed at the higher rate simply because you crossed slightly into a higher tax bracket. Story 15. The number of adults who do not understand the concept of compound interest never fails to astound me. Story 16. I'm a construction worker. I was out in a field inspecting for a dirt crew that was placing storm pipes, and one of the guys looked up at the sky in awe. He said, "Holy shit, guys, the moon is in the sky during the day." He was dead serious. He thought the moon only came out at night. This is a man with a wife and kids. Maybe he never looked at the sky growing up. He had forgotten about the eclipse a few weeks earlier. The whole crew gave him crap all day, pointing out obvious things like clouds and other stuff. Dude, how can a cloud come out? It's a sunny day. Story 17. I had to explain to a principal what the word dildo meant. A student called another student that on the way outside. I pulled him aside. He said he did not know the meaning, so I explained that we do not call people names, especially when we do not know the definition. My principal saw and asked what happened. After I explained, she asked what was so bad about it. Apparently she thought it had something to do with an armadillo. Story 18. I've always just tossed my trash out the car window. What do you do with yours? Hold on to it? Story 19. Every time my mom drove while it was snowing, she would comment about how windy it was outside, even when there was no wind. I tried to explain that it only looks windy because of the speed of the car, but she insisted she was right. I told her that the wind always blew toward the front of the car, regardless of our direction, and that it stopped when the car stopped. None of this made any difference to her. Story 20. At my last job, I tried to train 2 employees but could not get them to stack pallets properly. They frequently placed pallets upside down, sideways, or broken, then kept adding more on top until the stack teetered above their heads. I had difficulty teaching them to stack cases in basic interlocking patterns, so I created templates in Microsoft Excel to demonstrate. One employee still nested pallets into each other, although by then he seemed to understand interlocking. Story 21. I used to work with attorneys, and now that I am in law school, I still interact with them. I was floored by how many did not know how email works. I would tell them I was emailing a link that would take them exactly where they needed to go, and they would put me on hold to have their secretary operate their email for them. Story 22. I was standing outside my office building with a coworker, chatting, when a gentleman walked past us with a dog wearing a service dog vest. She immediately said thank you enthusiastically. The man did not break stride but looked confused. I asked her what that was about. She thought the vest meant he had served in the military, so she was thanking the dog. Story 23. First-year college students renting an apartment had a mice problem in a large city in the United States. Both the exterminator and I told them to keep food in the refrigerator or in hard plastic or metal containers. If you make it difficult for mice to find food, they will go elsewhere. We also set a couple of traps. A week later, I found an open box of cereal next to a mousetrap. They were still having mice. When I reiterated that food should be kept in hard containers to deter mice, they thought they would catch the 1 or 2 mice attracted to the cereal and that would solve the problem. I had to explain that there are millions of mice in the city and catching one would not solve the problem. Story 24. I was chatting with an older woman. She mentioned a shark attack at Cape Cod and said it was a shame and that she did not know why Massachusetts did not do what Florida did. Confused, I asked what Florida had done. She said Florida had built a shark-proof fence around the entire state. I blinked. Story 25. Oh, so much. I have met adults in their late 30s to 40s who do not know what a tracking number is for shipping packages, how to use libraries, which I have seen more often in young adults lately, or how to use email. Story 26. I was once talking to a coworker about the age of exploration. He did not know and refused to believe that you could navigate over land and water by using the stars and mathematics as a guide. I once had to explain to my stepfather that the sun is not the biggest star in the universe. It only appears large because we are close to it. The same man also does not understand why people read. Story 27. I don't understand that. Where does the sun go at night? When talking to someone about the relative sizes of the planets. Story 28. Just after Christmas 2023, my late husband and I were at the airport returning from visiting my parents, who had loaded us up with gifts. The gate agent informed us that our bag was overweight and we would be charged about $200. Realizing that one of the gifts from my parents was a large duffel, I asked how much it would cost to add a second bag. Only $50. Great. We stepped out of line, reshuffled some of the load into the second bag, and were back in a few minutes with 2 bags of appropriate weight. My normally bright, well-educated, and kind husband could not wrap his head around this. He kept looking at and talking to me as if I were an absolute idiot for suggesting it. The desk agent tried to explain it too. I said I do not understand how you do not understand that taking things out of a bag makes it lighter. The charge is for each individual bag, not the cumulative total. Eventually he agreed rudely, but he did not seem to ever get it. By mid-January his behavior had become so erratic and often mean that I confronted him, believing he was having a manic episode. I will spare the rest of the details, but he was dead by March 2025. If there is a moral to this story, it is that I would like to see more research on the brain impairment caused by mania and bipolar disorder. There does seem to be some similarity in symptoms to Alzheimer's disease, but it does not appear that much research has been done in this area. Story 29. My sister-in-law's boyfriend, much younger than me and a member of Generation Z, thought postboxes were decorative or historical. He was astonished to learn that you could put letters into them and someone would collect and deliver them. Story 30. I have a coworker who has managed to keep her job for the last 8 years. We work in a professional setting where most people have graduate degrees. She has a well-earned reputation for being an unreliable collaborator who consistently does her own thing. Last week we had a walk-and-talk meeting in which she expressed astonishment that decisions made in meetings establish expectations about who will do what and the timeline. Story 31. I had to explain to an ex-boyfriend that there are continents and that Europe is not the only one. He could not understand why Australia and the United States were not in the Eurovision Song Contest. He also thought that Africa was a single country. His mind was blown when I showed him a map. I also had to get the history books out because he believed dinosaurs were made up and not real, and I had to explain evolution. He could not understand it. Story 32. I was consulting for someone with a successful business who was looking for investments to expand. I reviewed his pitch deck, and the conversation went like this. I'm not a mathematician, but even at a close glance your numbers are wrong. Impossible. Turned out I was right. This person did not know the difference between gross and net. How he managed to stay out of the red still baffles me. I think if he had been in a traditional industry, he would have been ruined. I found that laughable. In another meeting, a man raised his hand while we were reviewing a document I had prepared. I'm a little confused. Who is this Roy fellow? Roy? There are no names in that document. He did not know what return on investment was, and thought it was an alternate spelling of Roy. Story 33. My friend, a nice guy, has always struggled to make ends meet, partly because of some questionable choices. Over the years I have had to explain to him that the following ideas would not have given him the extra income he needed. Multi-level marketing, online trading, cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence-generated content, and dropshipping. Basically any get-rich-quick scheme advertised online over the last 10 to 15 years. Come on, you are 50, not 15. You have been around long enough to know what is blatant fraudulent advertising and what could actually work. Story 34. Smart person I worked with had a Master of Business Administration degree from a major university. He told me he did not believe in evolution because he had seen single-celled organisms under a microscope and believed that proved they remain the same and did not evolve into humans. He thought things evolve like Pokemon. Story 35. They entered a customer's address as Denmark, the Netherlands, because they thought Denmark was a city in the Netherlands. They noticed the copier or printer displayed an out-of-toner message. Instead of asking someone or following the display instructions to replace the cartridge, they scanned the document to themselves and then attempted to print it from their computer by sending it to the same device. Story 36. At the last election, a young work colleague said, "I don't know who to vote for. No one has ever told me." Story 37. If we book this recurring meeting from your personal Outlook calendar, then when someone else needs to take over this work stream, you will have to delete all the meetings and the new lead will have to recreate them in their own personal calendar. Outlook does not let us transfer ownership of meetings, and because you forwarded the invite to several people instead of inviting them directly, updates and acceptances do not display properly. There is no way to hand these meetings over to someone else. If we book the recurring event from the shared team calendar, which we all have access to, we do not have to delete and recreate it every time the lead changes. As a bonus, if you are off sick, someone else can reschedule or join and lead the meeting, which we cannot do when your personal calendar is hidden. This person earns at least twice what I do and needs help sharing their screen in Microsoft Teams at least once a week. They have declared that all meetings must come from personal calendars. We cannot use the team calendar. I am so tired. Story 38. A few years ago, everyone was talking about an upcoming solar eclipse. It was a big deal. Hotels along the path were selling out. My coworkers were discussing using welding shields to view it when our janitor overheard. He asked if we actually believed in that. I assumed he meant the shields would not provide enough protection or that he thought we meant something else, but another coworker asked him to clarify. He said, "You don't believe in eclipses, do you? You are supposed to be pretty smart. If the moon went into the sun, it would obviously melt." Story 39. It's commonly accepted that friends are attentive to each other. This relates to a conversation from a few weeks ago. One of my newer friends literally walked away from me mid-conversation and never returned. She had been talking about something that was happening for her. I agreed that it was a big deal and shared a similar situation, but she walked off and started working without a word. At first I thought she might have been stressed, so I did not take it personally. However, when I raised it with her later and it happened again, she blamed me for not noticing that she had become distracted. I said distractions happen, but it is important to recover once you realize you have drifted off. She told me she could not promise to be attentive. We are friends, apparently, yet she can mentally drift off whenever she likes without any consequences. That conversation honestly made me feel insane. Story 40. Just a few years ago, I had to explain how to copy and paste to an executive assistant. We work for a global corporation. Story 41. It took me a while to realize that my warehouse employee was illiterate. When I gave him a list of products, he retrieved them without problems, but when I asked him verbally to get something, he could not. He matched words on the page to words on the product. He did not know what the words meant. I'm impressed he has done as well as he has. Ironically, I have to write down instructions for him because he cannot read. Story 42. Fucking reply all on emails where I've included you and another person on purpose. Don't just reply to me, especially if I keep re-adding that second recipient with every reply or if your job relies on email communication and you likely grew up with the internet. No excuses. I am astonished how often I have to explicitly ask people to please reply all to keep the other person in the conversation in 2025. Story 43. Not trying to be political, but the people saying we would not have so many cases of coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 if we stopped testing had a hard time getting past that logic. Story 44. I was checking out at Target at the self-checkout and knew an item I was buying was 20% off. When I scanned it, the price changed from $109.99 to $103.99, not 20%. I called an employee over and explained the situation, and she seemed confused. She told me that I got the sale with the $103.99 price. When I said that 20% off $109.99 would be $87.99, she got an attitude and literally said, "No, it's not, ma'am. It's only a couple of cents." She spoke to me as if I were trying to trick her. I was floored that she did not understand basic math. She had to be in her mid-20s. How do you calculate tips if you do not know what 20% of something is or think it is only a couple of cents? I am still shocked by this. Story 45. This is a small one, but I recently learned that my significant other never knew Bob is short for Robert. He thought they were completely different names and was surprised when I showed him that most of the people he calls Bob are named Robert. The same applies to Bill and William. Story 46. In my country, Poland, they have added a new school subject called health education. Covers many topics, and sex education is part of it. Some people say it is unnecessary because parents can talk with their children or because it will teach children how to masturbate and have sex. There was an interview about how unnecessary health education is with 3 male politicians. The female host asked them what the difference is between menstruation and ovulation, and they did not know. Story 47. That person was me. I was way too old when I figured out how paper was made. Is paper made from wood? How do they cut the wood so thin? That's not how you make paper. Story 48. She did not know that a thesaurus was a book and insisted it was a dinosaur. Story 49. People learning I have type 1 diabetes are often surprised because I don't look fat. Obesity is not the sole factor in developing type 2 diabetes. It increasingly does not discriminate. They ask if I've tried diet and exercise to put my diabetes in remission, or if I've heard of Ozempic. They listen while I explain that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder in which the immune system attacks the pancreas, rendering it, so far, irreversibly incapable of naturally producing insulin. Type 1 differs from the far more common type 2, in which the pancreas can still produce insulin but does not use it effectively. While my condition is permanent, I can eat whatever I want if I check my blood sugar, do the math, and inject the corresponding insulin. They then respond, "So you're allergic to sugar then?" and start strictly monitoring everything I eat, refusing to accept that in the short term hypoglycemia is an equal or greater danger than hyperglycemia. Even insurance companies, which dislike the ongoing, unpredictable, and expensive as needed nature of treating type 1 diabetes because it does not fit their business model and they want it to be a single cheap pill per day, and emergency room doctors who are more familiar with the type 2 default have said similar things to me. In summary, I am jealous of the blissful ignorance enjoyed by people whose pancreas successfully does its job and automatically adapts by naturally producing the insulin needed to maintain blood sugar in a normal range. Story 50. I have to explain to grown adults that I was born and raised in America, so I don't have a British accent like my dad. Story 51. Recently, I explained to an American friend that a United States tariff is a tax on items imported into the United States. The buyer, the importer, pays that tax to the Internal Revenue Service, and the importer typically passes the cost on to the consumer. I have no idea how an adult could hold such a backward belief. Story 52. A while ago, I was door knocking for a local city council candidate on the block where I live. We have an active block, and I know many of my neighbors. I ran into a neighbor who lives a few houses down. We were friendly, and our children often played together. We started talking about neighborhood issues, the election, and my candidate. He did not know what a city council was, that our city had one, or what it did. He thought the mayor did everything. He also did not know who our mayor was, which might not be surprising, except she lived on our block and he had met and spoken with her many times and had never realized she was the mayor. Story 53. My husband was divorced before I met him. He had owned a house that was sold, and the proceeds were divided between him and his ex. She was shocked at the small amount she received, saying the house was worth $350,000 and she therefore wanted $175,000. They had only owned it for a year and had barely made a dent in the mortgage, but that meant nothing to her, and she simply could not accept any explanations. To this day, she tells anyone that she was cheated out of her rightful windfall. Story 54. I was a team lead in quality control in manufacturing for a while. A slightly younger woman was hired around the same time for another team lead position, so we were peers. She had a college degree, so she earned a few dollars an hour more than I did. One day we were working on the floor and she talked about wanting to visit Brazil with her son someday. This was before the Olympics there, and she kept saying how much she wanted to go. That made me wonder how different the Olympics would be, since it would be winter in Brazil while we watched the games in summer here in the United States. She was confused and asked me to clarify. I thought she was joking and explained that seasons are opposite in the northern and southern hemispheres, but she did not believe me. I thought she was pulling my leg until she insisted she needed to look that up later to make sure I was not trying to pull a fast one on her. Story 55. I used to work in a retail copy center with a self-serve fax machine. One woman came up after using it, showed me the paper and said it didn't work. The machine had returned the document. I guess she thought faxes worked like the pneumatic tubes at the bank. Working there taught me to keep a poker face. I could never tell whether people were genuinely clueless or just messing with me. Story 56. I was talking with a man in his late 60s about climate change. He argued that winters are still cold. I asked whether he knew the difference between weather and climate. For anyone who does not know, weather, short-term events measured in days and localized. Climate, long-term trends measured in decades to centuries and widespread. Story 57. I am gay. During dinner with family, I mentioned being gay and my cousin's boyfriend asked, "Isn't that the same as bestiality?" I wasn't offended because his tone and expression showed he was serious. He is known for not knowing much in general. Story 58. My American friend did not quite understand the idea that people from other countries know and speak different languages. You're Swedish, right? Do you speak English with your family? No, I speak Swedish with my family. Ah, how did you learn Swedish? What followed was a bizarre explanation about native tongues, overlapping languages, and the earth-shattering realization that American, like Mexican and Brazilian, are not languages, and that many houses in Europe are older than the United States. Story 59. When my first husband and I were dating, he did not know that women have separate openings for menstrual flow and for urine. I explained what I thought school anatomy had covered, which was interesting, laughing out loud. Story 60. My roommate thought we could not get mosquitoes because we were on the second floor and that spraying only the stairs would be enough to keep ants out. Story 61. A woman on my bus was shocked to learn that, even though she lives on the other side of the country, the sun still rises in the east. Story 62. Zipper merge. The same mouth-breathing drivers whose children ask if you have games on your phone see the zipper and say they are letting people in. Then they and their 6 dumbest friends try to squeeze in front of the same driver, usually a semi-truck. Traffic stops and backs up from there. Everyone has to wake up 15 minutes earlier because this type of person was granted a driver's license. Story 63. I learned a couple of years ago that one of my coworkers did not know how many letters there are in the alphabet. Story 64. How many people do not know where the government gets its money? Story 65. A woman I knew did not understand why pumpkins lasted so long unopened and tried to convince me they were fake. I had to explain the concept of skin to her. Story 66. We were on a talk show in the Netherlands when a guest, a singer-songwriter named Mon, asked how we knew the names of dinosaurs since they are extinct. She did not understand that humans created those names, or more generally that humans give names to animals. Story 67. I was either a sophomore or a junior in high school when my history teacher made an offhand comment that they needed to use specific whiteboard marker colors so students who were colorblind could see them. But the way he explained it made it seem that anyone who was colorblind to a color did not see that color at all, as if it were invisible. I was baffled and asked him to clarify because I could not believe an adult had just said that. He doubled down, saying the board would look blank to someone who was colorblind. I asked whether, if I were colorblind to green and looked at the grass outside, I would see nothing. He became angry and said he did not want to talk about it anymore. Story 68. Every day at my job, I serve mostly older people at a restaurant. Yesterday, I was berated by an older couple after they abruptly got up from the booth where the host had seated them and moved to the one next to it. I walked up to greet them, and they began complaining about how uncomfortable the other booth was. The conversation went like this. I can't believe it. In the other booth, my husband could barely fit on one side, and I was 2 feet from the table. How is anyone supposed to eat like that? What a stupid design. Me, you do know the table moves, right? What? What do you mean? Me, the table moves. It slides on the floor. What do you mean it moves? So I walked over and slid the table about 6 inches to the side to show them. Of course, as these things often go, that only made them angrier, which made me laugh. I really need a new job. Story 69. The metric system. I work as a merchant marine in the United States. When I was second mate, I was once discussing taking on fuel and ballasting with the captain. The ship was built in Singapore, so the tanks and tables were in metric. We were going to load 350 cubic meters of diesel, and the captain asked how much ballast water we were going to discharge. I said a little over 300 metric tons. The captain asked, "Are you sure?" I said yes. Diesel is about 12% lighter than seawater. The captain asked, "Yeah, but how many cubic meters?" I said about the same, a little over 300 cubic meters of water. The captain asked, "How do you know?" I said the metric system is based on the mass of water. 1 liter of water has a mass of about 1 kilogram. 1 metric ton is 1,000 liters, which is 1,000 kilograms. The captain said, "Wait, what? Wow, that makes sense." Story 70. We were technically adults, but in college my roommate thought chocolate milk came from brown cows. I was dumbfounded that he had believed that his whole life. Story 71. I am a teacher. Schools teach to statewide standardized tests, and there is no history test, at least in my state. So if a student does well in math and English and science to a lesser extent, they are described as thriving. Speaking personally, I think this is by design, and the government does not want people to know history. An ignorant population is easier to control. Story 72. My girlfriend had it with me. She told me about her therapy, in which she has to imagine a hallway with windows. Each window represents a different time in her life, filled with bad memories of bullying and so on, which she is trying to process. While she was telling me that, I just stared at her blankly because I did not know what she was talking about. Imagining a hallway? That led me down a rabbit hole online, and I discovered I have aphantasia, apparently my whole life. I cannot form mental images, such as thinking about a red apple and seeing a red apple in my mind. I always thought that when someone said they thought of something, it was a figure of speech. I had no idea it was normal to actually see things when thinking about them. It is pretty rare. About 2 to 4% of people have it as well. When I describe a horse, I can recall where everything goes and describe in great detail what a horse looks like. But I do not form a visual image of one in my mind. Story 73. He was 6 feet 7 inches tall and tore his knee anterior cruciate ligament. He could not understand why the surgery had to wait until they could find a cadaver that size. He did not know what a cadaver was. The conversation in the restaurant was awkward. Story 74. Explaining daylight saving time, how it was not a myth, and that the clocks did in fact change. Story 75. My ex-husband confidently said our town was 2,000 kilometers above sea level, even though we lived on the coast. He was derisive and dismissive when I pointed out the contradiction. Story 76. I once had a coworker, an adult woman in her 40s, who was convinced she lost an hour of sleep every night during daylight saving time. Story 77. My brother, a single man without children and with a high-paying job, tried to convince me, a married man with 2 children and a lot of debt, to buy a boat. I was especially annoyed when he said we all have the same 24 hours in a day, and that my saying I cannot find time or money for a boat was just an excuse. Story 78. Double-clicking on a computer. An older woman in her 50s or 60s was interning at the healthcare office where I worked in the billing and records department. I showed her how we scanned records and papers and organized them in the basic file system. She could not get a file to open. She did not know what a double click was and was visibly struggling. Even when I told her to click the mouse button twice, it did not work because she clicked so slowly the system did not register it as a double click. I spent about 20 minutes teaching someone in 2016 how to double click a mouse. She lasted 1 day. Story 79. My sister told me today she had recently been talking with our mother about mental health. When she was younger, she sought help for depression. Our mother said she never understood how my sister could be diagnosed with depression because her blood work always came back clean. My sister was disappointed that our mother never researched what she was going through. Story 80. I heard someone say he wants to call immigration and customs enforcement on a Puerto Rican family next to him. Story 81. Coworkers proudly deny overtime opportunities because they don't want to be taxed more. The more you make, the more they take. You're denying time and a half for the easiest job in the company because you think it will cost you at the end of the year? That's not how it works. You're only taxed at a higher rate on the income that falls within the higher bracket. So guess who works 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. most Saturdays and puts that extra money into his health savings account, getting an additional benefit at tax time? It works out for someone in the end. Story 82. One woman who did not like the farm near where she lived asked why they kept the farms operating, saying that with all the grocery stores we have now, we do not need that many farms anymore. Story 83. Not a big deal, but recently my brother said that he doesn't understand why the moon goes through phases. He thought it should always be full. I tried to explain it and drew a picture, but he still didn't get it. I let it go because I didn't want to shame him too much. But come on. Story 84. I attended meetings of a non-religious organization, and every meeting ended with a prayer and the words, "In Jesus' name we pray." I expressed concern that this was not inclusive and suggested that, at minimum, we use a more generic prayer that does not mention Jesus. The attorney I spoke with asked, "But what religion believes in God but not Jesus?" I know law school does not teach religion, but I thought a person needed a general education to be admitted to law school. Story 85. I once had to explain to a grown man the difference between a square and a rectangle. I said, "It's like a square, but longer," and I thought he was going to be offended. Story 86. I had a roommate at university who did not know how to use a can opener. This was in the 1980s when we were in our third year. She was not from a wealthy family. Story 87. I had to explain fractions to a grown man twice my age yesterday. Story 88. Right now the issue is speed cameras. Drivers complain not just about receiving their first ticket but about getting tickets repeatedly. What is the matter with them? Do they keep making the same mistakes at work? There are also drivers parked in bike lanes. What is it about the no parking, no stopping sign that they do not understand? Story 89. I had a direct report who would always ask very simple, easy-to-look-up questions. After the second time, I told her she could save time by looking them up herself. 1,000 requests later, I told her she needed to be more independent and find answers on her own. She said she did not know how, so I asked her to show me. She had literally never searched anything online and did not know she could. Mind you, she was in a remote computer-based job. She was very inexperienced in many ways. I could not fathom how she had been hired. She did not know how to search past emails, so she printed messages when she received them to review later. It was astonishing to me. Story 90. There was a thunderstorm outside. We were talking about lightning and thunder. They did not believe me when I said thunder is the sound of lightning. Not even after I explained that you could count the seconds between the lightning and the thunder to figure out how far away the storm was. They just said, "I don't believe that." Story 91. I had to explain to an ex-coworker who was female that sleeping with a woman while dating a man is cheating. She insisted she was bi-curious and that sleeping with a woman did not count as cheating. It made me lose all respect for her as a person, to be honest. Story 92. My former coworker did not understand yes or no questions. She kept giving blatantly wrong answers, so I finally had to ask her what she thought yes and no meant. She was fired because she was a moron. Story 93. That the sun is a star, just like the stars you see in the night sky. Why we always see the same side of the moon. What causes tides and why we get neap tides. Why there are different phases of the moon. Maybe because I grew up on the ocean. But really, have you never wondered any of these things and searched for them? Story 94. Teachers in districts that run a traditional school year are not paid for not working in the summer. They receive a single paycheck in June, roughly equal to 4 regular paychecks, paid in arrears for the previous 10 months of work because the municipality spreads salary payments to earn interest on the funds. This is a negotiable item between the teachers' union and the school board, not free money for teachers. Story 95. Seen on television. Representative Hank Johnson of Georgia was concerned about the United States military buildup on the island of Guam. He said, "My fear is the whole island will become so overpopulated that it will tip over and capsize." Story 96. I owed a friend, a 40-year-old woman, some money, so I stopped by her house when she was not home and placed an envelope with a check in her mailbox. I texted her to say I had done so. She told me I had made a huge mistake and that she would never get the check because she would be home late. I asked, "Do you have problems with mailbox thieves in your neighborhood?" She said, "No, but the mail carrier comes around 2 p.m. and will collect it." That is how I learned she had no idea the flag on a mailbox signals the mail carrier that there is outgoing mail to collect. Otherwise, the carrier only drops off mail. Story 97. A man complained about how hard it was to remove the plastic inner cap from a stick of deodorant. He didn't realize he could simply turn the dial to raise the deodorant and lift the cap off. Story 98. My favorite example is when an American kept insisting that in my country there just had to be an Independence Day. I am French. It started because I told them July 14th, what people call Bastille Day, though we do not call it that, was not the equivalent of July 4th in the United States. It is not an Independence Day. We did not become independent from anyone. In fact, throughout most of our history, we were the colonizers. Other peoples gained their independence from us. Then the conversation shifted because they argued that we gained our independence from the monarchy. From a United States perspective, I understand that is where the mind goes, but that is wrong for us. July 14th commemorates, in part, the events of 1789, beginning with the storming of the Bastille, which eventually led to the fall of Louis XVI. The monarchy did not end there. After these events, France had more kings, including Louis XVIII and later Louis Philippe. We even had an emperor for a while, Napoleon. We do not celebrate the end of their reigns either, so it is still not an Independence Day. I could not get through to them. They insisted we had some kind of Independence Day, as if the sky would fall if we did not. Story 99. I worked with a woman who was about 24 and had a bachelor's degree. She didn't realize that canceling a credit card doesn't erase the balance. You still have to pay what you owe. She told us she had a great plan and couldn't believe nobody had thought of it before. Buy all new furniture and a new TV, then cancel the card and get it all for free. She didn't believe me when I said she would still have to pay the bills. I wonder what happened to her and whether she is still that naive. Story 100. My wife does not realize that turning the thermostat down does not create cold air. It only stops the unit from producing heat. She once lit a candle directly beneath the thermostat in winter, then wondered why the house was 50 degrees while the thermostat registered 85 degrees because the flame was 2 feet below it. Story 101. Every day at work, older people look at me with nothing behind their eyes as I explain how to scan a barcode. Story 102. I had to explain to my boss the other day that Google Chrome is not Microsoft Edge. Story 103. I work for a veterinarian who is a supporter of former President Donald Trump and is anti-vaccine. She made fun of me for getting my coronavirus disease 2019 and influenza vaccines this season, then chastised a client for not vaccinating their dog when she said, "Well, when your dog gets seriously ill, you will wish you had listened." What? Story 104. Explaining Barack Obama's birth certificate to someone. It was a sign of things to come. Story 105. A secretary printed a document in portable document format, then scanned it to save a digital copy. My mom once tried to receive a fax but thought it would not arrive because our fax machine was out of ink. Story 106. In a manager's meeting, I watched a 38-year-old man with 3 children, who was the manager of a department of about 25 people, try to explain to our boss that the reason we weren't producing enough product last week was that Mercury was in retrograde and it had somehow affected employees' mood, so they were not working as hard. He was dead serious and presented a bunch of supposed facts about the alignment of the planets and added some zodiac nonsense. It was painful to watch at the time, but it has become a running joke in the company. When something goes wrong, we say it's because Mercury is in retrograde and everyone gets a chuckle. Story 107. My father went to buy a new car with cash, but I later found out he was making payments. When I asked why, he said the salesperson told him it was cheaper to take the loan and that he could pay it off after 6 months. I was speechless. Story 108. I shouldn't eat any meat for health reasons. At work, most people think vegetarian means pescatarian, and I had to explain I couldn't eat the tuna sandwich they prepared for vegetarians. Thankfully, I am the only one in my office who avoids meat, and I am used to intermittent fasting. Story 109. I taught an adult that preheating the oven actually does something and is not just superstitious. Story 110. I was 17 at the time, and at work I had to explain to a man that the apple saplings we sold would not start bearing fruit for a few years, because younger trees are easier to transport and plant. He asked why he would not just go to the grocery store and buy apples then. I replied deadpan, "I do not know, sir," because I could not believe we were having this conversation. Story 111. This is a story from a friend who grew up in Alaska. One time she was in a conversation with someone who asked, "How can Alaska be so cold if it is so close to Hawaii?" Took her a moment to realize what he meant. He thought Alaska was an island next to Hawaii because of maps of the continental United States. Story 112. I was working at a restaurant, cutting lemons with my coworker when she held up one and asked how they are made, since they are all a little different. I told her they grow on trees, and she did not believe me. I was amazed. Story 113. I once knew a girl who, when a conversation about being scared of flying came up, said she did not know why anyone was afraid of flying because airplanes have those inflatable slides you can use in an emergency. After some incredulous questioning, it turned out she thought the slides simply unrolled to the ground and you could slide down while the airplane was crashing. She was in her mid-20s. Story 114. I'm an English teacher who works with several other teachers who do not have subject-based degrees. I often have to explain the meanings of classic works of literature that English teachers should know before they teach a room of teenagers who are taking exams on those texts. Story 115. My mother-in-law, who is a member of the Trump cult, told me that since she is a registered Republican, it is against the law for her to vote for anyone else. Story 116. Driving is sadly being taken over by a me-first mentality. Somehow that means zipper merges are bad because people are cutting. It's maddening. Story 117. Two stories stand out to me. When I was young, my parents told me credit cards were bad and that I should never have debt. They did not explain credit scores, raising credit card limits, or building credit history. I was told to buy everything with cash or finance the rest. As an adult, I bought my first car. The salesperson said no one would finance me for less than 17% because I had no credit history. I put down more than half the car's value, and they still would not lower the rate. I paid it off as fast as possible and researched how credit scores work. I got my first credit card at 22 and started building credit. Now my score is about 820, and my parents are completely awestruck, as if it were a miracle. My grandmother bragged about a 3% return on her investment account. I told her she should fire her financial advisor because many accounts were returning well over twice that. She refused to believe me until I showed her my 401k retirement account returned 12% the previous year. She still uses the same financial firm and refuses to change her investment strategy, and she no longer talks about finance with me. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.